Yo, what up, 910? How we doing, y'all? Good. Hey, if you have your Bibles with you, open up to Colossians chapter 3. This is where we're going to be for the next couple of weeks as we dive into week 2 of our walk series. And last week, Sean and I got to stand up here and really unpack the first couple of verses of what does it mean to walk. And if you're new with us this weekend, we're stoked that you're here. The whole premise of this series is asking the question, what does it mean to walk with Jesus? What does it mean to have a relationship with him? And man, if you're, no matter where you're at today, sitting in this room, if there's any part of you that's like, who is this Jesus? You know, like, it's kind of undeniable that he existed. He's a character in history. He was this teacher, right? Christianity claims that he died on a cross. He forgave the sins of the world through his death. And then he rose again from the grave, proving that he could make dead things alive. And that you and I, without Jesus, we're kind of these walking, talking, dead things. Right? Like, left to myself, I'm sinful. And yet this Jesus character, he split the calendar, right? He, in and of himself, his name is a curse word, right? Like, nobody ever, Justin Bieber'd when they, stubbed their toe. I didn't, trip over Harley. I was like, Justin flippin' Bieber, right? And yet, Jesus Christ, his name is powerful. And 2,000 years later, he is this character. And in this series, we go, and who is this Jesus? And what does it mean to walk with him? And I love the concept of the word walk and its simplicity because, right, if you ever watched a little kid learn to walk, I've, like you all know, 10 nephews and nieces, and I've watched the variation of them all learning to walk in one way or another. The other day, Amber called me and she showed me this video of Wesley. He's kind of undeniably my favorite right now. He's a little tank. He's the one that went outside in the Frozen boots and that's it, right? Naked in the snow, just freaking legend. And he has this little run. He runs into Amber's room the other day, my sister, and he looks at himself in the mirror, and I'm not fibbing. He looks at himself in the mirror, and he goes, Mommy, I look good. I look handsome. And I was like, what 3-year-old looks in the mirror and says, I look handsome? And then he said, Mommy, will you do my hair? And she did his hair, and he just kept staring at himself in the mirror. It's glorious, right? And I was like, I love this kid. But then, 2 days ago, my sister and her husband are out of town. My brother-in-law's a farmer, and they're in Texas on this wheat and potato conference. That's a thing, okay? For the farmers of the United States of America, that's a thing. Crazy. But anyways, they send me a photo, ask me afterwards, I'll show you. But it's Wesley, and he's got this 4-inch gash on his forehead. And you would have thought homie was in Disneyland, because he's got 4 stitches in his head, and he's got this big old beaming smile on his face. Nothing phases him. But he was running through the living room, and he tripped and he took a nosedive straight into the corner of a piece of furniture and just gashed open his forehead. Right? If you've ever been around, if you have little siblings or little kids in your house, you've ever been around, most people take precautions in their house, right? Have you ever seen those rounded off things that you can put on coffee tables and stuff to make sure that kids don't trip and hit the corners? Or maybe there's a gate somewhere in your house so that a baby can't fall down the stairs. You take all these precautions because when somebody's first starting to walk, right? We kind of talked about, it's a little bit like Oceanside Street Ninja Warrior, right? Where they're these drunk people walking around trying to figure out which way is up. And you're like, what's going on? Babies and drunk people, they're very similar. And so what we do for babies is we kind of put gates and soften edges to make sure that they're okay. And what I love about this series is that so many times we challenge you guys as 9th and 10th graders to go, hey, there's certain things that we kind of want to deny access to for a little bit while you're learning to walk with Jesus. And I love the stories coming out of winter camp for some of you that went, man, I need to end a relationship. Man, I need to lock down my phone. And I need to change friend groups. I need to change the way that I talk to my mom or my dad. And I need to create some of these guardrails and soften some of these edges. And for a time, there might be moments as a 9th grader and a 10th grader, as you're learning to walk, that you need to shut off access to certain things in your life. Right? Or some of you, maybe you align a little more with the rehab stuff that we see up there. The PT, where the dad's learning, or the kid's learning to walk again, and he's like, come on son, you can do it. And you need a mentor, you need a life group, you need people around you to help you rally to relearn to walk. As some of you confessed, years of addiction. As some of you, like for the first time, talked about some really hard things, and you're fostering this vulnerability. We're creating this community and this culture where we trust each other enough to talk about the hard things. Hey, how many times have you been in a life group before, and you're like dying inside, and they're like, hey, how you doing? And you're like, fine. How's it going? Good. It's like, what is that, right? Like, that's not what the church is meant for. We're not supposed to come here with our masks on and try to just pretend that everything's okay when things aren't. And yet what we're learning so much in this series is that happiness, joy, contentment in life, it's not really about circumstances. And I think a lot of the world around us would go, happiness and joy are dependent on your circumstances. Like, no one should be happy if they have cancer. No one should have joy in the midst of pain. No one should be experiencing more joy when they walk away from a dating relationship. No one should be happier in the midst of hardship. And yet Scripture is going to go, man, joy is not really dependent on your circumstances. It's dependent on your character and communion. And what do I mean by those two things? Character is kind of who you are when nobody's watching. Like, what's going on in your life? Who are you at the core of who you are? I'm not talking about who you pretend to be. I'm not talking about who most people think you are. I'm not talking about like the description in your bio. I'm talking about who you actually are. And joy is dependent on genuine character, walking with Jesus, and then communion. What do I mean by communion? I mean closeness to Jesus. Happiness and joy are not dependent on circumstances. They're dependent on character and communion. And the more we learn to walk with Him, I think the more and more we'll find out that the secret, kind of the unlocking the treasure of life is communion with Jesus, going, this is joy. This is life that's actually life. That's what 1 Timothy chapter 6 says. It's life and life abundant. It's what John chapter 10 says. And today I want to kind of talk about something that's probably one of the most core, life-changing truths that for me in my walk with Jesus, the more I understand this, and the more that I unpack this concept, the more and more life itself makes sense. So I'm not just talking about like the exposition of a text. I'm not just talking about like diving into the Bible, going like, help me understand what this is. I'm talking about like life as a whole. Like my marriage, the way that I do work, depression, anxiety, lust, sexual impurity, greed, finances, like all of those things start making a lot more sense when we start unpacking this concept. And in Colossians chapter 3, the very first thing that Paul points out is that he goes, since then, in verse 1, since then you've been raised with Christ. The very first thing he points out is, you've been raised with Christ. Remember Jesus. Then he goes, set your hearts on things above, set your minds on things above. Because Paul knows the simple truth, right? That there's like 24 hours in a day, right? Which is like 86,400 seconds, something like that, a little over 86,000 seconds. Like there's all of these moments in every single day where we kind of get to choose what our focus is on. And if you're anything like me, there will be full hours that go by, sometimes days that go by where I'm just not thinking about God. And I kind of get into a groove, and it's homework and sports and all these things, and I'm not there mentally. I'm not setting my mind, I'm not setting my heart, and I just get caught up in life around me. And then sometimes I'll walk into a weekend service or a Wednesday and something like that, and I feel distant from God. I start wondering why. And it's like, well, 86,000 moments in a day, how many of those were spent focused on Him? How many of those were spent with your hearts and your minds set on things above? And Paul's going to go, please remember. Because he knows we tend to forget. Right? A recent study just came out that said the average human being touches their phone about 2,617 times a day. Right? 2,617 times a day, roughly. Like the average human being. So that's like every touch. So like texting, you're like that's what? 28, 37, 72 touches for some of you that send your like narratives. You know who you are, right? Some of you are like, okay, period, right? Like that's all you text ever. And all your friends think that you're pissed at them. You're like, whoa, period at the end. What the heck, right? But others of you are like, and then some of you are like voice texters, and none of your texts make sense because Siri sucks, right? But 2,617 touches a day. And this study, it was done by a guy named John Mark Comer. He said, said, what if God touched our minds the amount of times we touched our phones in a day? Right? What if the amount of times that you touched your phone, what if that was the amount of times that God just touched your mind? And if you're anything like me, like a lot of times my relationship with God is kind of like waffles, right? Like, you know, waffles have all the little squares in them, right? And for me, my like first 3 waffles of the day are God. Right? And I have a $100 bet with one of my best friends that we wake up 5 days a week, 5:30 in the morning, we make coffee, we read, we spend time, and it's like now we're, 3 months into it, it's March 1st, or starting our 3rd month into it, and it's kind of just like habitual now. But there's sometimes for me that even in the midst of that habit, even if my first like 3 or 4 waffles are God, I can kind of spend the rest of my waffles in my day just doing my thing. I'm going, oh, those are yours, God. Like, oh, you can give you the top left corner. But then 75% of my day, I'm not really thinking about him anymore. I think God, like Mark Comer's challenge is, what if God, our relationship with him was a lot more like a pancake, right? You just pour that syrup on there and it just kind of like there's no getting sections of pancake without syrup at that point. You know what I mean? Like, what if it wasn't 2,617 touches on my phone a day and like 150 touches for God? What if it was just continuous setting my mind and my heart on him, going, God, I want to walk with you today. Not take a step on the weekends and a step on Wednesdays, and the rest is kind of, and we wonder why we feel distant. But verse 5 of Colossians 3, we pick up this next section where it says this. Oh no. Okay, here we go. Verse 5. It says, put to death, therefore, underline the therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk. Huh? See what we did there? See what we did there? We used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self and its practices, and put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge of the image of its creator. Here there's no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Okay? If you don't know what any of those words mean, you can Google them, most of them. Probably don't Google circumcised, because that'll be weird, but here's what stands out to me in this passage, okay? If you just picked up Colossians chapter 3 and you open up verse 5 and you started reading them, this is what Christianity sounds like. Don't, definitely don't, ooh, a big old D-O-N-T, don't. Got it? Don't. And we walk around as Christians, like in the world around us, going like, don't. Lust, don't. Oh, swearing, don't. Jeez. And we kind of like, we become like Bubble Boy. Right? We can't do anything. We walk around going like, It's like all this pressure to not do things. And we focus on being like really, really good. And we go, did you see Colossians 3? I can't sexual impurity, I can't lust, I can't greed, I can't like anger, I can't rage, don't. And we wake up and we just feel the mounting pressure of not doing things. And Christianity becomes all about not sinning. And one of the most life-changing, life-altering concepts for me was when I started understanding and realizing that Jesus' call is not to stop sinning. It's to fall in love with him. And the more that we fall in love with him, the less we will desire sin. See, friends, we sin because we love sin. And we sin because we love the world. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 says, if you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. Which means that if we love the Father, the more that we love God, the less we'll love the world. Right? There's not a single person in this room that woke up this morning and like made your little checklist of life and you went like, number 1, sin. Okay, cool. Number 2, brush my teeth, right? Like none of you woke up this morning going like, checklist item, sin. Right? We don't sin out of duty. We sin because we love sin. We sin because it's pleasant. We sin because it's less painful than the alternative option. Like none of us sin just because like kicks and giggles, right? Like I have to do this. We sin because we go, I kind of want to. And when it comes to God, God is vastly more worthy of our heart's attachment. We must awaken a new and a stronger affection that displaces the former affection for the world. Now here's the problem. If we just focus on like white knuckling, you know what I mean by white knuckling? It's what you do when you're on a roller coaster and you like grip the sides and your knuckles go white. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you are just trying to do something really, really difficult, we just go like, we start white knuckling it. We go, I will stop. And for some of you, let's just talk about pornography for an example. Right? For some of you, when it comes to kicking your pornography addiction, you go, I will stop looking at porn, I will stop looking at porn, I will stop looking at porn, I will stop looking at porn. Right? But then if you look at pornography again, what happens? You feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel isolated because you, in all of your efforts, you tried to do everything you could do to stop. And then guess what? You didn't stop. And then so you either have to like justify it and kind of give up and just like give into this like passive, well, I don't really care, that doesn't work anyways. And just like, you just kind of become this passive human being. And you look at other people that are like chasing after life and you go like, well, they're just a try-hard. Right? And you just become really comfortable with like being this passive human being that goes, I tried to white knuckle it, that didn't work. I tried to do the Christianity thing, it didn't work. I'm not a good person, I'm not a moral person, so now I'll just sit in this in-between uncomfortable space and act like I don't really care about anything. And for some reason, in 2020, it's kind of this like cool thing to do to just like not really care. Like nothing really bothers you, you're not really that passionate about anything, but then you can't really lose anything either. And a lot of us just sit in this passive space of not really caring. And what happens when we try to just stop sinning on our own effort, it's a little bit like this, okay? Imagine this is like your soul. This is like the beaker of your life, okay? Do they still use beakers in like science classes? You know, you got like the glass beakers and you like pour crap in there and it explodes, right? And then all of you, when the teacher turns their eyes, you like start pouring all this other crap in there, you know what I'm saying? I know who you are, okay? And so just imagine for a second this is like the beaker of your life, okay? And if we just try to, like all inside of here is all this like, it's this love for the world and these desires that we all have, right? Like you're all on the brink of driving, and if you're anything like me, like cars catch your eye, maybe you're just at the point where you're like, I don't care what it looks like, I just want 4 wheels, right? Like give me, and I don't care, whatever, a PT Cruiser with flames, give it to me, I don't care, right? PT Cruisers are fundamentally, categorically the worst cars on the market, okay? I'm just going to say it. Here's a fun fact about PT Cruisers. Do you know to replace the battery, you have to remove the front left tire? What kind of design is that, okay? Anyways, that's neither here nor there, okay? Imagine this is the beaker of your life and you just go all your desires for car, for boyfriends, for girlfriends, for like money, good grades, scholarship, being good at the sport, travel, Instagram followers. Oh, they liked my photo, yay, right? Like I get attention, all that crap's in here, okay? Just the desires. And you walk around going like, okay, I went to camp, or I went to church, and I found out that looking at pornography is wrong. And so I really, really want to stop looking at pornography. And you have all the resolve in the world to going, I'm going to stop. And you might even set up like accountability with the people around you going like, I will stop. I'm going to charge my phone in the kitchen, right? I'm going to stop because I know that one day, right? Like they talked about marriage and the effects in sex and marriage and like the statistics there of the amount of the top 2 reasons people get divorced is pornography and money. And if that's the top 2 reasons, I don't want to get divorced. And so I'm gonna really try hard and focus and read the statistics and do all this stuff. And that's kind of like this. Like you're going, here's statistics, here's me going, I will suck out the desire and all these things. I'm just going to white knuckle. I will not look at pornography. Okay? And that's number 1. And then you just go, cool. Like that's good statistic, good to know. And then you start looking at like slavery in the world. And I think all of us in here would agree, if you look back on the history of our nation, you go, when the Civil War broke out and we fought slavery, when African Americans were enslaved in the United States of America, like that was fundamentally, categorically, like the PT Cruiser, wrong, right? Like there's no one in here that could convince me otherwise. There's not a single person in this room that could go, oh, well, technically, if you look at the positive effects in the economy, like no, like you're not going to convince me that slavery was okay. And yet now, you fast forward a couple hundred years, we find ourselves in 2020, where the statistics on slavery in the world right now, there's more slavery present in our world right now than there ever has been in the history of the world. I mean, its number one cause is the pornography industry. It's the sex slavery industry, where every time we consume pornography, every time we open it up on our phone and our laptops and our computers, our PlayStations, our Xbox, whatever it is, you are pushing that industry forward. Going, there is a market for it. Like 40% of online pornography users now are women. 99% of males before the age of 25 will have some sort of experience with pornography. It's rampant. And when we consume it, we're going, I'm a part of the problem that's creating the biggest enslavement of human beings that's ever existed on planet Earth. And that, like, knowing those things might go, that's really good. That's good stuff. Like, that makes me not want to look at pornography. That's good, man. And we might have more resolve to white knuckle it. But here's the problem. Even the strongest resolve in the world is not enough to dislodge an affection by leaving a void. We can't just dislodge an affection for pornography because what's left in here still? Other desires. There's still a void. There's still room in here for other things to creep in, and we might go, okay, cool, I kicked pornography, but now, man, there's this addiction to attention. And I walk into a room and I'm obsessed with what other people think about me. And every morning I'm obsessed with my outfit and how my makeup looks or if my hair's on point because I have to look a certain way because I crave the affection and attention of other people. And I'm desperately lonely and I'm terrified for people to know it. And our lives are just rampantly filled with these voids that we're trying so hard to fill or focusing so hard on not sinning. And when Jesus comes into the picture, he goes, look, put to death, therefore. When we go back to Colossians chapter 3, it says, put to death, therefore, and we have to ask the question, whenever you see a therefore in Scripture, you ask, what is it? Therefore. What's it there for? And here's how Colossians 3 should read. It should read, since then you have been raised with Christ, put to death, therefore. See how that makes a difference? It's not about stopping sin. It's about you have been raised with Christ. Therefore, displace the affection of the world by an affection for something so much greater, which is Jesus. And that looks like this. Right? When we understand that God is vastly more worthy of our heart's attachment, when we understand that the root power of sin is broken by the power of a superior pleasure, a more compelling joy, how do we displace sin? How do we stop sinning? We got to replace it with something greater. Right? And when we fall in love with Jesus, when we pour Jesus into our life on a daily basis, there's no more room for a desire to sin. It pushes it out. We don't need to daily convince ourselves that sin is a bad idea if we simply focus on abiding and spending time and remaining with Jesus. And the more time you spend with Him, the less you're going to desire the world. It's simple math. Fall in love with Jesus and you will not love the world. If you love the world, you will not fall in love with Jesus. What's the world? It's what comes naturally to us. It's what we want. It's what billboards scream you deserve. It's the American dream that says, get these things and you will be happy. How's that working for us? At some point, the simple question of prudence has to come into play, where we go, I keep chasing after these things, or I keep white-knuckling sin, going, I will be a good person, I will be a good person, and it's not working. The more we chase after Jesus, Thomas Chalmers, a great theologian, he called this the expulsive power of a new affection. Going, when we have this new affection and we're compelled by the joy that Jesus offers, the desire of the world will be expelled. Just like when I poured the water in here, all the air is expelled. If I can miniaturize you and throw you in there, you would die. You can't breathe under here. Why? There's no more air. So I could spend every day just vacuuming out the air all day, every day, but what's still left in there? More air. Until we pour something greater in here, and we expel the air from the beaker and go, that the love for the world is gone because I have this greater affection. You'll never white knuckle sin and be successful, ever. If you chase after Jesus, the desires for sin will fall behind you as you daily, every morning, wake up and go, today, God, would my love for you be refreshed? Would it be renewed? Would it be renewed? And then when air seeps in and your desire for lust or your desire for loneliness, that's where repentance comes in and you just go, God, would you fill that void? Would you fill that void? God, I need you. I need you today. And it's every single day waking up and walking. Single day waking up, taking one more step, and one more step, and one more step. 2,617 touches on your phone. What if God touched your mind that much and you just kept pouring water and expelling the desires of the world behind you? Let's look at some practical examples as we look at this passage. I love that. Man, we want to get that concept in your mind and then go, okay, let's dive into a couple of these. Char's going to share 4 super practical examples for us to go, hey, here's what it looks like to actually live this out.
Great if I get thirsty. It's a humid day out. Guys, I love that we're talking about this because this is so much of my story, and I feel like there's a lot of people in this room that can relate to. And just picturing this like white knuckling here, I gotta do better, I gotta be the perfect Christian girl to match, what my parents believe and what I've believed my whole life. And so sex is bad, gossiping is bad, all of these things are bad. And I was living even in the church, even raising my hands in worship and not knowing this freedom that my leaders talked about, that my pastors were saying, no, we promise this is the better way of living. But I didn't understand that because all that I was being fed was these don'ts. And I think the reason is, if we stop here, if we stop at verse 11, all we've done is touched on the things that we're supposed to put off. But we've been raised with Christ, which means we have a new life and that we don't have to stay in the grave anymore, right? Jesus rose from the grave. He's no longer there. So with that, we get to leave the grave behind us too. So I want to just touch on what are these things that Paul talks about. We put off these things in order to put on these things. And essentially this word instinctively, right? Like as a kid, when you grow up, you learn how to walk. And now we can just do that habitually. Without conscious thought, we know how to take one step in front of the other. And now we have to learn how to walk again. If you have put your faith in Christ, there's a new way of walking, and sometimes it's going to hurt, and it's going to be a slow process, taking it step by step, but there is a new way of walking that leads us to freedom. So what we're going to do is make a column with 2 rows, 1 through 4, and one row is going to say put off, and then the other side is going to match it and say put on. And so from this list of our earthly nature, right, the world raised us to believe sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is all idolatry, that was okay. Right? What does a kid say without, being told when they're 2 years old and someone takes their toy? They say, mine. Greed is bred in us. But I just want to touch on this idea. The first bad number 1, what I have in my notes, or the don't number 1, is impurity. And that's just any misuse of sex. So sex outside of marriage that God beautifully designed for it to be within the covenant of a man and woman inside of marriage. And I think a lot of us, I know myself, I grew up in the church saying, okay, well, how far is too far? My boyfriend and I, we love Jesus, but where's this line that everyone's talking about? Because, you can still do things outside of sex, right? But I think if we're asking that question, our view of love is so distorted. And we're asking really the wrong question. And it's more of, God, how am I glorifying you in this moment? How am I loving this daughter or son that you've created in your image through these actions? And what we have to do is not look at that line as something we have to meet or pass or stay far away from, because that enslaves us, right? We're still living under this rule of don't do this. But what if God offered an opportunity for us to experience what sexuality in His joy looks like? And so when we do that, we replace it with love, this right view of love that only comes from God. And so in that second put on, you can write put on love. So put off impurity and put on this new refreshed view of what love is. So what does that look like tangibly for us? It might look different for everyone, right? Like locking up your phone, or saying goodbye to an unhealthy relationship, or telling your parents that you're just really struggling and that you want to learn what means to have a healthy view on guys and girls. But ultimately, it means arranging our days so that we can begin to love the things that God loves. And it'd be really easy for me to just say that, like, go out into this world, go figure out what God loves. But I'd be directing you to the wrong thing. And this is the answer. Spending time in His Word, learning what He loves because He's written it down. Spending time in prayer, in communion with the one that loves you the most. Asking your life group leaders, hey, how can I learn how to walk in love differently? And so, number 2 is going to be, we're going to put off greed, or that's covetousness, or essentially wanting what someone else has. When we choose to believe that life is measured by the things we possess or the statuses we obtain, other than craving our righteous or right-standing relationship with God, it means we're putting the things of this world before our relationship with Him. So, I know this is hard. I have an Amazon app, and it's really easy to hop on there and be like, cool, I don't even have to pull out my computer. It's right here at my fingertips. Let me look at the next new thing that I want to buy. Or on Instagram, right? Like, you can swipe up if you want to order this too. If you've seen something good, there you go. And so it's all right there. And like, I really like her outfit. I want to go out and buy the same thing. And don't get me wrong, buying things is not the act of sin that they're talking about here, but it's essentially saying, I see what you have, and I want it that much more. And a good metaphor that I talked with the girls about at the girls' retreat, but I was convicted by this too, and I think a lot of times when I think about all the things that I don't have, I really miss the joy that it is to know Christ. And so if I come to Him at the foot of the cross being like, I see you hanging there with like the nails in your hands and you're bloody and you're beaten up, but like that wasn't enough because I still want this relationship to work out, or I still want my perfect house someday with my Pinterest board dreams come to life, or that new iPhone just because it has the better storage. God, like, come on, I really need it to match all those photos too. And so instead of having this thing of greed, we have to put off greed and put on humility. And in that humility, we're going to experience the freedom from pride or ignorance. And it means we have a modest view of ourselves. Taking on this posture of gratitude means that we know that this grace that we've been given through the cross of Christ is far more than we've ever deserved. And we sit there and we go, who am I that the God of the universe, the creator and sustainer and lover of all things, wants to have a relationship with me and wants to know me intimately? And I truly believe if we walk into our campuses or even walk into church and we live as if we know we have enough and that we are enough, I think we'd look really differently, and even change like the greed epidemic that I think Ariana Grande started with her song that says, I see it, I like it, I want it, I got it. Again, we're being raised by the world into thinking, you can have whatever you want, just go out and get it. But what if we live knowing that what we want is Christ and He's given us everything that we need? So the third one is put off anger. I probably don't need to elaborate on this much, but if you've ever had your heart feeling like you're boiling up inside and you're either like me as an aggressive child, I kicked a wall in my house and I simply blamed it on my really thick shoes. Don't do that. But that anger was boiled up because of a long trigger of things, right? Like I was bitter that my mom took my toy away, or, well, I think I was like 12, so maybe I didn't have toys. But I was bitter that she didn't let me go out with my friends, or I was bitter that she took my phone away, and all these things that essentially was just making you look really, really ugly. And my attitude got worse and worse and worse as time went on, and it all turned out lashing into kicking a wall. Again, don't do that. But we all know that day by day when we hold on to these grudges, when we hold on to bitterness, it's evident in our own hearts, and we know that we have a really hard time loving other people when we do that, and it's really evident to people around you. I know I personally don't like to spend time with angry people. I don't even like myself when I'm angry or holding on to grudges, but we have to put on forgiveness. And I love in verse 13 in Colossians 3 that says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has any grievances against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And that, I'm just like, man, I've been forgiven. Why do I only want to choose to forgive people when I think that they deserve it? Or when I think that they fully have understood, no, you don't understand. You hurt me really, really bad. Okay, you get it? Cool, now I'll forgive you. But what does it look like to forgive with no expectation of the forgiveness even being given back to you? because essentially that's what God's love is, right? He's forgiven us, and we still choose to walk in our own ways instead of saying, all right, receive it. Thank you, Lord. I want to live differently. So we put on forgiveness and put off anger. And lastly, slander. Or you can also write gossip in all caps. That's what I did. And this is not just a girl problem. Just like pornography now, the rampantness of that, gossip is a problem with guys too. So I know that it's evident all throughout this room. It's even evident in my own life as well. And so we say this because it's not just a thing that's going on in high schools. Like, the most disturbing thing is when I think I'm around a group of women, like moms, and that's the part where I'm like, I don't want to be like that. When I hear moms gossiping about other people's kids, that just like breaks my heart. And for me as a 25-year-old thinking, I do that too. Even in ways that I think I'm loving someone, if they're not in the room, or if I acted like they were in the room and I was saying those things, would I really be loving them in that moment? And I love that Chris Hilkin says, we have far too many enemies out there to have any in here. And in John 13, Jesus even says, the world is going to know me by your love for one another. So that means if there's any grievances among you, as Paul's saying, we have to get rid of it. We have to put on kindness. And I quoted the last sermon, but in the wise words of Bambi, I think it was Thumper the bunny, he said, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And sometimes that might work, right? Holding your tongue, that might be that white knuckling, like, okay, cool. But what if we could put on love, put on kindness, and enjoy the freedom and joy that is encouraging someone, lifting someone else up with words instead of tearing them down. And really even being cautious, this is just a tidbit, because I did this too. I thought that not gossiping, but still surrounding myself with people that gossiped meant that I was off the hook. But it just meant that everyone else that looked at the circle of people that I hung out with associated with me with people that gossiped. And so challenge yourself to be surrounded by people that speak kindly, right? And that starts in this room. So I know that it's hard. I know that these temptations are still going to come. No matter how much sin we continue to put off, we're still going to be tempted in these ways. But when we give into temptation, that temptation stops. And I know we're also going to want to give into that. That's going to seem like the better option, and yet it's so not, because we have one of two paths. We either have the painful route of continuing in that sin, and then we experience the guilt and the shame and the insecurities, and we don't want to show up to church, and we can't possibly raise our hands, and we've been too far from God to ever open up the Bible. Or we can experience the little bit of pain that's on the side of repentance and saying, you know what, God, I've wandered, but you're coming back. I'm coming back to you, and you have open arms. I'm coming back to this life group that I know is going to be for me and push me closer to who you are, Lord, and all the joy and freedom that is in you. So we have two options. They're both a little bit painful, but one leads to life, and one leads to death.
Yeah, that's so good. And just as we wrap up here and finish off today, I want to challenge you guys that even the way that Paul writes this passage is very intentional for him to say, hey, put off these things, but then put on these things. And I don't know if you've ever been around somebody, but if you've ever been around somebody or seen it on a movie or anything like that who's been addicted to smoking cigarettes before, when they stop smoking cigarettes, they always pick something up. And you can almost always tell when somebody's been addicted to cigarettes because they always have like a toothpick in their mouth, or they're like constantly like snacking on something like peanuts or popcorn or chips or something like that. Or, you know, they'll have these little tics or these little habits because where they left this habit, there's now this void that they fill with other things. And that's just true of who we are as human beings. Our hearts, our souls are idol factories. Right? Worship is not something we do, it's something we are. And we get to choose what that is. What is the object of our affection? And I think knowing us well enough, because He created us, God gives us this really, really awesome imagery of putting off certain things and then replacing them by putting on other things. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks kind of unpacking the rest of this passage, and I love that Shar went in. But let's put off impurity, but let's put on love that's actually love. Let's put off this greed, but let's replace it with humility. Let's take out this anger out of our life and this sin through anger, and let's replace it with this forgiveness and this slander and kindness. And you can really read this passage that way, to go, it's not about don't. It's about replacing. And the awesome thing is that we have a God that's for us. And we have a God that's in our corner, that loves us, that desires something for us. And it's as if he's coming in going like, hey, would you take off that like ragged, ripped, smelly, like take that shirt off and I'm going to give you this one. And I'm going to give you something brand new to put on. I'm going to put you something on that's better for you in the long run. And it might be painful momentarily, but in the long run, this is life and life abundant. This is real affection. This is real love. You are fully known. You are fully seen by a God of the universe that goes, I am for you, and I have a better outfit for you. Put these things on. Take these things off. But don't just focus on taking things off. Fall in love with me. These things will come naturally to you.